Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to dial into this Audience on Air session. Today, we'll be discussing how to best leverage audience strategies for the holiday season. I'm Akanksha Sinha, and I'm an audience product expert. And with me, I have Marco here.
Hi, and as Akanksha said, my name is Marco, and I'm an account strategist on the agency team. And if you tuned in for our earlier hangouts on identify, re-engage, and expand, you may already remember me from those. So we're back with you today to talk about audience strategies for the holiday season.
So let's take a moment to understand why the upcoming holiday season is really crucial for your business, right? The US retail e-commerce sales are expected to increase almost 16% during the upcoming season. And this kind of trend is something that we are not just seeing or expecting in the US, but also in most of the major countries, right? For example, in Canada, shoppers are reporting that they'll do almost 40% of their holiday shopping online, which is like a huge increase from the numbers that we saw in 2015.
Yeah, and I would add, as someone who's working directly with ad agencies managing these accounts, a lot of my clients, especially those who are in this retail space, this is already one of the #1 topics that we're talking about on all our calls. So it may sound a bit odd because it still feels early, but I almost feel like this is as late as we can possibly do this hangout because you really do want to be starting your holiday planning now.
Right, so the countdown has really begun, and we want to make sure that it's your best year ever. So before we jump into the specifics, let's take a moment to understand what's the best way to kind of capture on the upcoming demand with Google's audience solution. So the basic crux is that it doesn't matter where your customers are. It's all about being at the right place at the right time with the right messaging, right? So the basic idea is that if you have a customer who is maybe searching for you, is browsing the internet, is watching videos on YouTube, the basic idea is for you to be in front of them to reach out to the right user with the right time, with the right messaging, and make the connection more and more personalized. So before we jump into further, let's take a quick sense of the agenda that we'll be covering today. So one, we're going to give you a couple of key dates and milestones to achieve for the upcoming holiday season. We're also going to be giving you a quick guide in terms of how do you best re-engage with your existing user base. Then we'll go into a little bit of specifics around how can you look to expand your customer base, and then finally cap it off with tips and tricks on how to maximize performance across all of your audiences. So some of the key dates and milestones to keep in mind are that you start off as early as September, right? Now, a lot of you might be wondering, it's mid of September. Why are we having this discussion right now? And that's completely legit. However, we have data that proves that people start researching for their online shopping, their holiday shopping, as early as October or even more earlier than that, right? So 33% of people actually begin making purchases in the same time period. So you have to start right now in terms of your strategy, in terms of your planning, to make sure that you are well equipped and well set up for the upcoming season, right? So I'm going to walk you through some of the key milestones to keep in mind. Right now, the first and foremost thing is that you have to make sure that you have finalized your strategy, right? And what that means is that you know who's your intended target audience, what's the best way of reaching them, and also making sure that you've actually covered most of the fundamentals, which means that your website is tagged, all of your main assets are tagged, you have your lists that are either going to get populated or are already populated for you to leverage, right? Let's say if you're using a product feed, you have to make sure that it's up to date, which means that there are no errors on it or there are no other stale items, right? So all of that happens right now. Then we move into October, wherein you basically launch all the campaigns that you have set up for in September to just do that quick stress test to make sure that there are no issues that happen while you launch those campaigns, while you test run them, and also that you make sure that you prep them up for the peak season, right? Then we move into November, wherein we are basically trying to prepare for two main key pushes that happen. So two main holidays are Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and that keeping those in mind, you make sure that you have your creatives as well as strategy all locked in, right?
Yeah. And as you're moving into early December, so after that Cyber Monday, Black Friday holiday, I think this is a really great example of what Akanksha was speaking about earlier with being there at the right place at the right time with the right messaging. because the types of people who are purchasing early on in December or certainly a week in advance of Christmas are very, very different from the shoppers who started their research early on in October, eventually made their purchase right on Black Friday. So these are last minute shoppers. Maybe they're looking for that special deal that they didn't quite see. Maybe they got invited to a last minute party they had no idea they were going to be attending. So you want to think about having creative that really engages that user with an immediate need. And also keeping your budget sufficient, very important. So we'll get into more details on a lot of this as we go on. But you don't want to have run out of budget by the end of November or very, very early on in December, because there are those last minute shoppers who are probably going to be even more desperate to find the right gift.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll be moving on now to our next section, which is the festively titled Make Your Lists and Check Them Twice. And what we'll be talking about here is how to not only engage, but also really excite your customers, your users, as you go into the holiday season. So we want to think about some key stats just to kind of set the table in this conversation. And the first one here, you can see that 2 in 5 mobile shoppers leave a website before converting. The second stat is very much related to that first one, and that's that 49% of users visit 2 to 4 websites before making that conversion. Now, what that says to me, and this is something that we're seeing not just in retail, but across a lot of different spaces, is that a customer's needs, a customer's passions, in this case, the need to find the right gift, is trumping that brand loyalty. And that points to the importance of re-engaging these users who have been to your site, who have shown certain behaviors, so that they do come back to you to make that eventual purchase. And then I love this final stat as well, and that's that organizations that leverage these types of behavioral insights actually outperform their peers by 85% in sales growth and 25% in gross margin, which are pretty massive stats.
Mm-hmm. Those are huge. So the one thing that I would suggest that you keep in mind is that a lot of people out there are constantly researching. They have access to internet as well as technology all the time. So you have to make sure that you not only just be in front of them at the time of them making a conversion, but also meet them at that stage wherein they're researching. Because that research begins months and weeks ahead of the actual time when they'll be actually making the purchase.
Yeah, that's a great point. So going on to a couple questions that we can use to, again, frame this conversation. So number one, who were my most valuable customers last holiday season? Now, there are a few different ways that you can answer that question from a strategic perspective. Having a list that has a sufficient duration where you're including those users can be important. If you have email lists, this is a fantastic opportunity to use those as well. Who converted on my site during my most recent promotion? Now, this one I think is a very, very important question specific to the holidays, because something I'll see with many advertisers, especially those who have maybe products with a little bit higher price point or just that last a long time, is that they don't like to go after people who have already bought on their site. But if you think about the holidays, maybe I recently purchased a tablet, purchased it 3 months ago for myself. Well, hopefully I'm not in the market for a new tablet yet, assuming that it's working well, but I might be in the market for one for a gift. So you want to think about, specific to this season, those past buyers become even more important. And then finally, this last question, you really always want to be asking this: who has recently visited my site but has not yet converted?
Right, and the basic idea here is for you to not only just prepare yourself for the upcoming season, but also leverage all the insights, all the data points that you already have, since you have access to that kind of data, that kind of insight, right? So a lot of you, this is not the first time wherein you're prepping for a holiday season, wherein you've done this holiday push before. So make sure that you capture that demand by keeping in mind what worked for you in the past and then using that as a guiding principle.
Yeah, you always want to use those learnings from the past holiday season, also not forgetting the massive amount of data that I'm sure many of you listening already have. And on this slide, we get into a little bit more detail on The different types of lists, again, this goes back to having the right creative messaging, the appropriate bids for different types of users. So this first one is once again a pretty general best practice. So you always want to treat people differently depending on whether it's someone who has made it to your shopping cart and then didn't quite convert, or someone who came to your site, spent 10 seconds, and then left. That's a very different user. Now, both of them may be more valuable or require a different messaging strategy than someone visiting for the first time, but they're also unique groups into themselves. So we have some other examples here. Past purchasers. I love this third one, visitors to holiday-specific pages, because in cases like that, these people are almost certainly looking for a deal. They're not going to the Black Friday page of your website so they can find any old product. They are there because they're looking for something specific to the holiday season. And then finally, you'll see YouTube video viewers. So for those of you who are on YouTube, strongly recommend taking advantage of those lists as well, because you do want to use that data that you've accumulated from running those video ads to actually produce those conversions, on search, shopping, etc.
Right. Two quick call-outs before we move on from this slide that I'd love to make is, one, you have to make sure that you basically have your entire website, any assets tagged properly, because that's where you'll be able to capture your website traffic. That's where you'll be able to capture all the people, all the users who are coming onto your website, right? And that is especially true for the holiday specific pages. So if you have any sale pages, if you have any standalone pages that you've created, make sure that they are tagged, because those tend to get dropped off a lot. The second call out that I'd love to make is the basic crux of your audience strategy is to make that connection with your user. And the best way for you to do that is to have that sense of personalization that you can achieve best through, one, segmenting them properly, and then showing them the right creative message.
Yep, great points. And now we see some pro tips for holiday audience strategies. So again, I think we've talked about this a little bit already, but make it to the finish line. So what we mean there is ensure your list durations are long enough. So Akanksha was speaking to that when we had that timeline earlier, but you really do want to be sure you don't have, maybe use a 30-day list in general. That's your primary all visitors list you use to reconnect with those past visitors. That may be great for most of the year. During the holiday season, people are starting research early. They're converting in the first week of December after they started researching back around now in September. So have those list durations be a bit longer for the holidays. And then you can see future proof of your strategy. So this goes back to that point about past purchasers, using a list duration. In this case, especially with people who have already bought, that's quite a bit longer. So I would say 540 days, absolute minimum of 365 the full year. And using promotional materials too, or going back to people who have bought from you at a prior promotion. The type of person who bought from you during your last sale, probably a pretty good indicator they're looking forward to the next one. And now we have some more best practices for holiday re-engagement. So thinking about holiday themed ads, using a very, very clear call to action in those is important. Also doing anything you can just to play up the seasonality, mentioning gifts. It just makes it more fun and exciting. And we want to think about how to really connect with these users as we've been speaking to, not just show them a generic ad. On search, we do recommend generally keeping your lists as bid only for those of you who are in the AdWords interface, rather than only showing ads to users who have already been to your site or on a particular list. We like to add those lists to existing campaigns so you can bid up. But we've been talking a lot about having nice tailored creative. One way you can tailor the creative even further is to use if functions to actually show different ad text to people who are coming back. And then finally, thinking about your display strategies for product viewers, lower funnel audiences, using dynamic creatives. So dynamic creatives will automatically actually tailor the image they're showing to the correct product that someone has already viewed and they may be shopping for. And then finally down here you see be sure to use display responsive ads. This is, again, a general best practice that becomes even more important come the holiday season, because you really do want to just be there for as many impressions as frequently as possible for your users. And so if you don't have all the formats open, you're ultimately losing out on what may be a lot of very efficient clicks. All right, and then another reminder, don't forget to recalibrate bids and budgets. So I like this first pro tip here. So whatever percent increase you're expecting in traffic, use as a guide to increase budgets. So if you normally see 50% more visitors during the holiday season, then on paid, you should probably expect a corresponding increase. So having a budget that's about 150% of your normal monthly or quarterly budget may make sense. Also, increasing bids up to about 140% of yearly average can make sense. The reason we suggest this is that, as you'll see up there, the auction does tend to heat up. Your competitors are going to be doing the same thing. People tend to convert at a better rate during the holidays. There's just more interest, period. So going along with that, you do want to be sure that your bids are set to match that increased interest. And then, of course, always keeping an eye on your impression share, being sure that you're still showing kind of at your usual rate. If you're normally showing in 100% of available impressions for your keywords, all of a sudden you see that dip to 75%, 60%. That's a sign that maybe your budgets or your bids are not sufficient for this season. All right.
And then from this point, we'll move on to giving you a sneak peek into what's the best way of expanding your audience strategies to make sure that you grow your customer base and in turn grow your business, right? So for the holiday season, while it can be a good time to reconnect with your past purchasers, with your existing user base, it's also a great time for you to capture more and more users and acquire them, right? And for that purpose, what you see on the slide over here is a full funnel solution that we have for audience solutions. And in particular, we've highlighted the expansion part of it, right? So right from like starting to building awareness to like influencing consideration, you have a plethora of options out there in terms of targeting that you can leverage in terms of creating an expansion tactic, right?
And I would just point out there that these expansion tactics can be really useful for a couple different reasons. So the first is that given that it is the holiday season, people tend to show increased purchase intent, in-market audiences, audiences similar to your existing purchasers. This can be a more efficient and higher demand time to use those. The other advantage, and this is why I would tend to suggest if you're going to make use, especially of relatively upper funnel expansion tactics, doing it sooner rather than later, is this is a fantastic way to build your remarketing lists. So we generally do see that RLSA and remarketing, customer match as well, are some of our most efficient targeting methods. So why not have larger, more robust lists that you can use to reconnect?
And then there are two main steps that you can take in order to gear up for your expansion strategy. The first one is to target people who are similar to your existing customer base, right? So these are people who are very, very similar in terms of their profiles, their personas, or what is it that they're looking out for in the market as compared to your existing customer base, right? So they are spot on when it comes to targeting. Your holiday season is the best time to leverage these because not only is this user base new to you, but they're also in a way more targeted. There's a high likelihood of them converting, right? One of the best ways that I've seen advertisers utilize this is to run on similar audiences based on their past purchases, right? And the second one is around targeting people who match the characteristics that you can leverage through the Audience Insights report. Now, Audience Insights report is a free report that you get in your AdWords interface for each and every remarketing list that you have within the shared library. And what the Audience Insights reports give you is that you have an entire understanding of what's the demographic of people on a particular list, what other things that they might be looking out for in terms of something else that they are intending to purchase other than what you're offering. Also gives you a sense into what other specified targeting types that you can target in order to reach those people, right? So it's very, very important for you to kind of reach out to all the people who are important to your business while still keeping in mind what are the key factors that make them your target audience versus otherwise.
And very quick PSA for those of you who have switched over primarily to the new AdWords experience. Audience insights through shared library still currently available only in the previous AdWords. So do just switch back. I think Akanksha makes a great point that that report is really awesome. But just do be aware if you're having trouble finding it, that may be why.
And while on the previous few slides, we talked about how we have specific targeting types that you can leverage in order to do like an expansion strategy. What you can also do is, let's say if you don't want to do all of that work in terms of launching specific campaigns, you can try smart display campaigns, which is our fully automated campaign type on the display network, which helps you drive performance by utilizing our machine learning technology, right? And what that helps you do is reach people at all stages of the buying cycle. And basically, it helps you by doing smart bidding, so it's able to kind of bid the right value for the right users. It's able to do automatic targeting, so it helps find people irrespective of what targeting you might be utilizing, and also helps you by providing a great creative once you give us like basic assets that we need in terms of finding and creating those creatives on the fly. So basically, the general crux of your smart display campaigns is if you don't have the time, if you don't have the know-how, and if you want to take the guesswork out of it, launch a fully automated solution. Why? Because it's very, very transparent, it's very, very simple, and it takes a couple of clicks to get it going. And then let's quickly recap like what are some of the best practices to keep in mind when you're kind of making your foray into the expansion tactics. One is by setting a different value for these new customers. Now, expansion tactics are basically in pace for you to acquire new customers, right? Now, the price or the CPA or the ROAS that you'll be setting up for that should be either like a little bit higher than what you're currently paying to get existing customer base to convert on your website, right? So either think of setting up a higher CPA target or maybe softening your ROAS target to make sure that you're not basically letting go of all of these new customers even after targeting them. The other thing to keep in mind is launching promotional creatives, right? While it's a great idea to always keep all of your high-performance creatives in your campaigns at all times, but also consider rotating them with some promotional holiday-specific creatives, right? Because that helps you make the connection while also preserving your performance in the campaign. And the third one is flighted campaigns. Now, a lot of advertisers launched like these 1 week, 2 week campaigns that they basically want to run at one point. What I would suggest is for these flighted campaigns, do not run a smart display campaign simply because it needs a bit of a launch time in terms of learning. Ideally, I would suggest for flighted campaigns, launch specific targeting types and set those up a few days ahead of time such that you have ideal time to have enough learning and are able to reach an ideal volume to make sure that your flights are successful.
Yeah, and exactly. And just from within, as you're managing your account, that valuing new customers point, I think very, very important. And if you do decide to go ahead and launch some in-market campaigns, similar audience, I think it is very important to set a different CPA goal. Sometimes I'll see from working with advertisers, people fall in love with a certain CPA, say on the display network, but it turns out that all they're running is remarketing. So just do be aware that you need to value these new customers who might not be familiar with your brand differently from those who are coming back to you. All right, and now we'll jump into really getting into maximizing performance across audiences, and we'll jump in. So what type of bid strategy is right for your goals? So in the first case, we have here eCPC. So what eCPC basically will do is it'll allow you to retain control over what types of bids you want to set, even at the keyword level, but also give our system flexibility to increase or lower your bids if there are certain signals, either in the user, from the lists, to help bid to value. That can be a great strategy, especially for a time like the holidays when a lot more new users are coming, because maybe normally you're very satisfied with CPA performance, but as we'll see, it can even sometimes be a good idea to switch to eCPC, say on one of those flighted campaigns to really maximize traffic. Then we have target CPA, and I would say That's really the gold standard of AdWords bidding. So if you do have a target CPA, I think it is important to think about raising that bid. The number we gave was to about 140% of your general levels, and that just goes to the increased competition. One point that's really, really important here, and you'll be able to see the deck later, so I normally don't like to just get in too much to the text. But if you are going to use CPA bidding, you're planning on that, but you're not doing it yet, you really want to turn on that CPA bidding as soon as possible, because while this is an extremely powerful method of bidding, it can take a couple weeks to really start functioning at its best. So you want to give the system time to be trained. And then finally, I don't want to drill into target ROAS because I think for most of the viewers here, target CPA is probably what will make the most sense. But if you are already using that strategy and you're seeing great results, I certainly don't recommend going away from it. But again, as Akanksha had mentioned earlier, you may want to soften that target a little bit, much like with CPA, just because this is the holidays, it is more of a competitive time.
And I'd like to make a quick call out on target CPA. I think target CPA is a great bidding strategy. Why? Because it actually takes into account recency and frequency of your users automatically. So it can distinguish between if a user has been to your website yesterday versus like in the last 10 minutes, it'll be able to account for that while making the bidding recommendation. And that is something that is very, very difficult to achieve with manual bidding. So we've seen target CPA work best with your audience solutions and audience product.
Yeah, that's a great point, and just another reason why that does tend to be, like I said, kind of the gold standard of AdWords bidding. So moving on to some smart bidding more specific to the holidays. If you're getting a large traffic increase, can that affect smart bidding? Yes, it can. So in general, more volume, very good for smart bidding. So it's generally not something that should be too much of a worry. However, if you are if you're seeing this traffic increase due to a short-term promotion and not simply due to an organic increase in the holidays, which is probably going to be a very good thing, then it can, going back to the fact that it takes some time to have these learnings, make sense to actually switch to eCPC because the target CPA is going to be relying on the past data that has come in. So if there's, a 3-day period or Black Friday through Cyber Monday, you're seeing an incredible increase in traffic, may actually make sense to go to eCPC and to really make your bids as aggressive as they need to be. And then we're thinking about trying smart bidding, the question of kind of generally, can it handle seasonality? Can take, as I mentioned, 2, even up to 4 weeks to really hit full volume. So in terms of testing smart bidding for the holiday, you really want to, as I mentioned earlier, but just to reiterate, turn it on sooner rather than later. Because if you want your smart bidding to be working by the time the really peak of the holiday season comes, when you're probably having your big time sales, you see these massive increases in traffic, you want to give the system time to work in advance of that. And then finally, if you have creative swaps planned, and I think this is a really, really important point because we've talked a lot about having holiday creative and how important that is, getting users excited, showing the right ads to the right users. But we also really do strongly recommend having at least 1 to 2, we're calling them evergreen concepts, that are remaining active. So if you have a couple search ads that have been decidedly your top performing search ads for months and months, right before Black Friday is not the time to pause those ads. It may be the time to get creative with your if functions, to throw in additional creative, but you really want to keep those active because smart bidding is relying on this historical data and they're just good creatives that have been working for you. All right, and then we have some more do's and don'ts for holiday optimization. So again, I think a lot of these are best practices that really are important the whole year round. So using optimal ad rotation, something that is just generally a good thing. But I think this is a very good checkoff list to have as we move into the holidays because it becomes even more important to take care of these types of housekeeping items, which really can make a big difference. So, you can see relaunching paused creative rather than uploading the same creative again. That can be important because actually our bidding strategies, Akanksha was speaking earlier about just how smart CPA bidding is, it actually can use data from last year's holiday season, which is pretty cool. If you already have that data, why not take advantage of it? Using eCPC rather than CPA or ROAS selectively if you either are rotating creative very frequently or anticipating a massive spike, using all your ad types, as we'd spoken about, having responsive ads on display, very important. You also, and again, these are just best practices in general, don't pause all your creative assets in one ad group at one time. So keep those couple of top evergreen creatives going. Mitigate if you do really need to. You're going to have to raise bids again because it's very important that the system gets enough data to work with. And then finally, don't drop bids at the same time as you're adding these creatives. And I'd say just generally in the holidays, as you go into a big sale, we're suggesting that you raise bids, but if for some reason you're not comfortable with that doesn't fit with your budgeting or strategy, the last thing you want to do is lower your bids at the same time as you're making other changes, especially if you're on CPA bidding.
And I'd love to clarify this one thing, which we more often than not hear from advertisers saying, I ran the exact same creative last year, I paused it, but now when I upload the same creative, why is it taking much longer? Again, what Marco mentioned, it's always a good idea to relaunch the paused creative simply because there's so much of history and so much of data that is associated with it. Even though you might be uploading the exact same creative again, the system regards it as a new creative, which takes its own time to build up the history, right? And that's where you see the lag. So always and always unpause your previous creatives instead of uploading them all over again.
Yeah, very important point. I think one of those little known points. So sometimes it's important to reiterate it. And then we have some final tips here. Again, I don't want to read through all of these because I feel like we've touched on most of these already. And like I said, the deck will be available to you. So with that, I do want to get into your questions, but feel free to have a look. And thank you very much for listening, and most importantly, happy holidays.
All right, let's jump into a couple of questions over here. So the first question that we have is from Jenny, who's asking, shouldn't CPCs be lower during the holiday season because of increased traffic? Why do you recommend raising bids?
Yeah, and so it is intuitive to think that if more people are coming and searching, then there's just more traffic volume, maybe more traffic to go around for advertisers. So shouldn't the CPCs go down? The issue with that is that other advertisers are also raising their budgets. They're also raising their bids. They're seeing massive increases in purchase intent. And so even though there is an increase in traffic, we tend to actually see that there's an even more aggressive increase in budget and bids. Probably the biggest reason for that is that conversion rates, again, purchase intent, tend to increase correspondingly. So users actually are becoming more valuable, and your competitors are going to recognize that and increase their bids and budgets and adjust strategy.
All right. Next question is from Adam, who's asking us, are you recommending on GDN ads to keep 1 or 2 ads actively running while swapping out 1 to 3 additional ads in order to find the best converting ads? Yes, Adam, we are recommending not just on GDN, but also on search, that if you are ever thinking of swapping creatives very often, or if you are looking on gearing up for the holiday season by launching new creatives, at any point in time, always keep your best performing creatives live in the campaign, simply because that way you'll be able to kind of get a better handle on the volatility of the performance fluctuations that you might experience if you were to shut down everything and start all over. So always keep 1 or 2 or whatever number of ads that you think are best performing for you live at all times in all of your campaigns.
Yeah, so all great advice, and I would point out again that is even more important when you're using one of our automated bidding strategies, because anything that's relying on past data, when you kind of disrupt, throw in something new, it's going to take a little bit longer to learn, and you don't want it needing to go through that entire learning process during a big sale or your most important time, you want it to have that historical data to work with. All right, so our next question here from Mike, how much is performance impacted if I do not use tailored or personalized creatives? And Mike, to your question, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a specific benchmark for whether you're using holiday creatives or using your existing creative strategy. It is going to vary according to the advertiser, and that's part of why we recommend leaving those evergreen ads on as well. With that being said, just thinking about from the perspective of the users, as we've been trying to do in this deck, you want people to get excited. You want them to feel a connection to your brand. If you're able to launch, say, dynamic ads, you want them to see the product that they're shopping for. You know, dynamic remarketing is one area where we'll often see a pretty significant performance boost. So you just want to be sure that you're really testing everything and you know, getting in the mind of your consumer and trying to understand them and give them what they need.
Right. The next question is from Chris, who's asking, do smart display campaigns work well for all industries or only for retail? We've seen smart display campaigns work across the board, irrespective of what industry you belong to, till the time you follow our best practices. So there are certain things to keep in mind when you are launching smart display campaigns that you should follow, because once you do that you're setting up the campaign for success, right? So one of the key things to keep in mind is that you give it enough ramping up period, simply because there's a learning period involved in terms of providing the campaign with all the data, all the insights that are necessary, that it can already run through once you start running the campaign, right? So give it at least like 2 to 4 weeks of a learning period to understand what works for your business, what works for your website in terms of where to find your best performing users on what targeting, using what creatives, because it does all of that on the fly, on the go for you automatically.
Yeah, and I see our next question here is, are there any best practices for smart display campaigns? So I'll just kind of use that as a jumping off point to go to that next question. And I would say maybe more than any other campaign, and again, this is based on my personal experience, smart display, it's very, very important to follow those best practices. So the first, you want to set a reasonable CPA bid. And what we generally recommend using for that is a CPA that's about 50% higher than your search CPA, about 20% higher than what you're seeing on remarketing. That goes back to the point that we were making earlier, even with non-smart display, about valuing new customers differently from existing customers. The other really important point to note about smart display is being sure you have sufficient budget. So because this is entirely automated, we really strongly recommend having a campaign budget that's 20 times your CPA goal. I know that may seem a bit high, and if anything, we'd recommend controlling your budgets more by adjusting bids than that budget, because it, again, is just so important to get enough data, especially in such a key time like the holidays.
And I think the one thing to keep in mind for smart display campaigns is, while it's an automated solution, you're basically replacing all of your other individual campaigns that you might be running on the display network, because this one campaign can take care of it all, right? So when you're thinking of budgets, when you're thinking of bids, try and look at it from that perspective, because that might help guide your decision.
Yeah, great point.
We have one more question from ASI AdWords asking, will Google have additional resources to fix feed issues in Merchant Center during the holiday season so we can ensure our shopping ads are always on? I'm not totally aware of the schedule as to whether or not we'll have a separate session on shopping ads. However, we have our help center, which has the most up-to-date knowledge on how to best fix any issues that you might have with your feeds and how to fix all of those errors.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about just making sure that your feeds are up to date, that all your products are added. Unfortunately, I think the best advice that I can give here is to really do that early on. So you don't want to be reliant on Google's resources. You want those to be something extra that you can go to if you do need help. But the best thing that you can possibly do is just kind of getting ahead of the 8 ball here, being sure you have your feed totally updated and ready to go in advance, just like the rest of your strategy. All right. Looks like that's all our questions. So.
Yep. Thank you so much, everybody, and wishing you a happy holidays and good luck with the upcoming season.
Yep. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching.